Welcome to the swamp. Running a few minutes late, sorry for the delay, but everybody is here. We're so excited for the first cold front of the season. Yay. Oh, yeah. I'm so excited to have Dr. Paul George open our program this evening. Please give him a wonderful round of applause.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and it's wonderful being here. You know, once upon a time, this block had several mid-20s buildings on it, and during the last boom, they all went down, but nothing was built, and we at the college were lucky enough to purchase this lot just to expand this campus. And so here we are tonight, but I remember dining in some of the buildings here and kind of marveling at some. One was an old hotel. It was an arcaded look along the sidewalk, et cetera, et cetera. Deborah Mitchell and I go back a good bit. I've been very interested in her career in terms of some of the photography she's done in both Big Cypress Swamp and in the Everglades. And so when I heard from her a few weeks ago about perhaps coming here and making just a few minutes of remarks, I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity just to share this information with you, a little bit of historical background on the Everglades. And so I sat at my table tonight before I came over, and I wrote down a couple things. And the Everglades water system actually begins about maybe 100 miles north of there in what we call the Kissimmee River Basin. And altogether, you're looking at one point, to Mother Nature's hand, about 9 million acres of watery surface all the way down to Florida Bay. The water would flow from the Kissimmee River Basin. If it was heavy rain during the rain season, it would come into Lake Okeechobee. It would spill over. That water would move in a southwesterly trajectory all the way down into Florida Bay, and it was just an unbelievable plumbing system. And I got a real sense of that when I read both Grunewald's book called The Swamp and Jack Davis's wonderful biography of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in the Everglades, Providence. Both of those books are just superb. So we've got and we've had this huge water system, and I mean, it was really the hand of a providential hand that put it all together. It was so intricate, and it just seemed to work so well. But lo and behold, while Florida was still a territory, and Florida was a U.S. territory from 1822, a year after it was purchased, until it became a state in 1845. But in the territorial stage, there was already talk about draining the Everglades and creating some of the richest farmland in the world. And that dream went on into statehood. And of course, Florida seceded from the United States and then came back into the United States, hopefully with its tail between its legs in 1865. And the talk began again. And a man named Hamilton Diston, who came out of Philadelphia with somewhat of a fortune, would buy a huge amount of land in the center part of this huge watershed, and he was going to drain it and create communities and farmland, and he did to some extent, but drainage went much more slowly and much more expensively than he imagined it would do. And this should have been really, I think, a preview for the Everglades drainage program under the auspices of the state of Florida that commenced in 1906 off of the South Fork of the New River in Fort Lauderdale. So it's now under something called the Internal Improvement Fund of the state of Florida, and they're going to drain Everglades swampland, and this is what the governor at the time, Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, ran on a platform of draining it and create the richest farmland in the world. Drainage began, drainage proceeded slowly. By 1909, a lot of businessmen in the Miami community said, you know something, it's time we have some drainage off of one of the forks of the Miami River. And the state of Florida was really ingenious in what they said. They said, okay, you guys want a drainage dredge off of one of the forks of the Miami River? Go out and raise the money and buy the dredge, and the businessmen did, and drainage commenced off of the North Fork of the Miami River in 1909. The whole idea initially was to create through these drainage canals water that would flow into the canals and then flow in a certain path into much larger bodies of water that would absorb that water, and you create all this rich farmland. Little did we know that a lot of other maybe unforeseen consequences would occur. A, you would damage severely the Everglades, we all know that. And B, you would create this vast suburban area. If you can imagine this, Dade County in 1890, when it stretched from the northern Florida Keys to the St. Lucie Inlet, contained just 832 people. That same area today has going on 6 million people. And much of that is in what was Everglades swampland. So another one of the unforeseen consequences, of course, would be this complete destruction of so much of the Everglades. And I think it's especially poignant when you read both Grunewald's book, The Swamp, and Davis's book, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas's great book of 1947, Everglades River of Grass, when certain women's groups, as well as just the general population, began to look west because they smelled fire and smoke, and it was only 1916, and they said, oh my God, what have we done in the last less than 10 years? And it was the Florida Federation of Women, the Women's Club of Fort Lauderdale, environmentalists down here in Dade County that said, we got to do something. And they were able to set aside some land through purchase and through the efforts of the state of Florida to create Royal Palm State Park in 1926, and that becomes the core of Everglades National Park in 1947, which was a very propitious year for the park to open because that was the year Marjorie Stoneman Douglas's book came out, Everglades River of Grass, which actually was an overview of Florida history as well as, of course, the Everglades itself. And that, I think, really propelled an awareness on the part of John Q. Public that something needed to be done to preserve what we had left. And of course, that something to be done was Everglades National Park, but it was also kind of rebuilding the woefully damaged areas, both within the park and outside of the park that once were the wetlands. And we've been fighting that fight ever since. And I have a very dear friend in the audience, Vivian Miller, who represents the Everglades Foundation, and they have done so much in terms of bringing public awareness to what we need to do to bring back to a large degree what we've lost in the Everglades. And so I think that our sensitivity has really arisen. It's taken a long time, and we suffered a lot of damage. But again, it goes back to that very poignant series of passages that I've read, not just in those 3 books I mentioned, but in articles and what have you, of when people kind of turned to the west when they smelled smoke and said, oh my God, what have we done out there? The fires of the Everglades. You know, it's a contradictory term. How could the Everglades be on fire? Well, if you drain it and dry it, you're going to lose a lot of it, which includes its flora and its fauna. And that's indeed what's happened. So I think we're fighting the good fight now, and wonderful people like my dear friend Deborah Mitchell, of course, are telling the story through their artistic creativity. And I know we have a wonderful panel here who is much more conversant with the story than I am. But I'm just delighted to be here to bring you this very brief historical overview and introduction to this wonderful Everglades, with Everglades National Park representing about 1.4 million acres of what is left of the wetlands, approximately about half of what was there before. That is, from Lake Okeechobee down to Florida Bay, there was roughly 4 million acres. We're down to about 2 million acres. The park represents a lion's share of those 2 million acres of wetland. And there's a lot of good things going on there now to try to bring it back. But Deborah, I'll turn the mic over to the rest of this wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me well? So I've also often thought that Dr. George has an eidetic memory because you can ask him about anything and he can tell you all of the details. If you ever have the chance to go to his walking or boat tours, they're unbelievable. I adore them, so do take him up on that. I don't have an eidetic memory, so I'll have to read a few comments for you tonight. So I would like to say that despite its importance, abundance of wildlife, and subtle natural beauty, many people have never visited the Everglades and only have a vague idea of it as a tangled swamp, rife with pythons, mosquitoes, and alligators. Tonight, biologist Skip Snow and I will co-moderate this panel of 5 AIRIE artists on the transformative experience their residency in the Everglades has had on their work. To my left, we have audio composer Gustavo Matamoros. We have visual artist Reed Van Brunschot, author Anne McCrary Sullivan, and multidisciplinary Canadian artists Valerie LeBlanc and Danielle Dugas. Please give them a little hand and welcome them. To give you a little bit of background on AIRIE, South Florida is home to the only subtropical wilderness area in the country. And AIRIE is the only program bringing artists to the Everglades. AIRIE's purpose is to inform, connect, and support artists, writers, and musicians who wish to be inspired by the Everglades and then become ambassadors almost for our park. One example is we had an artist, Donna Levy, come in April. She's from Israel. Although she lives most of the time in Brooklyn, she spent the last several months in Israel doing several exhibitions, so now everybody knows about the wonders of the Everglades there as well. How do we actually implement the whole concept of bringing 12 fellows per year to the park? Essentially, we have generous support from the Knight Foundation, along with community and private grants and small grassroots fundraisers, such as the little calendar that's for sale outside. The new AIRIE calendar is for sale, and we have a benefit happening in January. I'll tell you about that later, though. Our board of directors is comprised of 15 people whose professional experience and visionary ideas push the program forward. I have a couple of board members in the audience, I think. Would you like to stand up for a moment? We have Tommy Kotz-Freeman right here. She's always shy. Thank you. And we have Anne McCrary-Sullivan, Skip Snow, and Gustavo also. These are people who volunteer their time on the weekends and suffer hundreds of thousands of emails from me about how we're actually moving the organization forward. So thank them for their service. So this year we really rolled up our sleeves to increase exposure, hoping an endowment will assist us with maintaining a steady operating budget to fund our next set of goals. It's unique. AIRIE is unique in that it's always been operated by artists, founded by Donna Markser in 2001, and then Christy Gass took over in 2009. Christy is the first person who started to really get a budget together for us, and that enables us to go out and have exhibitions and do community outreach. One of the things that the artists can do when they are in the residency is go down to the South Florida Collections Management Center for more in-depth research. That's where we have lots of things like specimens, which you're going to see a slideshow tonight where the artists have gone down to investigate things like that. And Reed was down recently too, so we have a photograph of that. This focus leads to greater understanding of how vital it is to protect and preserve our precious natural resources, raising awareness for the health of our Everglades through the cultural arts within the community is definitely something that we are passionate about. Recently, we have expanded our local partnerships to include MDC Homestead, FAU, FIU, the Arts Center South Florida, the Deering Estate, the Museum of Florida Arts and Culture, and the Audubon Society in Pinecrest Gardens. That's my intro. I would now like to introduce you to my co-moderator, Skip Snow. Skip worked for the National Park Service for 38 years and the last 25 at the National Park, the Everglades National Park. He has evaluated the effects of water management on park wildlife, worked to reintroduce native species, and spent considerable time working on eradicating the Burmese python. Since retiring in 2013, Skip is actually working harder than ever and has been pursuing a keen interest in the intersection of art and science and continues to volunteer for the park as an emeritus wildlife biologist. Give him a hand. Go ahead.
Hi there. So I'll just say a few words that kind of describes my relationship now with the park and with AIRIE as a board member and as someone who continues to love and visit and work for free now in the Everglades. I like to visit with the artists that are coming, usually before their residency, try and get some time in with them and talk about things as basic as logistics, people that they might want to talk to, places they might want to visit, but also gives me an opportunity to talk to them and convey some of the critical issues, some of the issues that are important to Everglades, as well as some of the research topics that are ongoing and that are current. it also gives me an opportunity to mention sometimes different initiatives, and recently one of the things that I've been bringing up is the fact that in August of 2016, the National Park Service, that's the government agency, the federal government agency that manages your national parks across the country, will celebrate its 100th birthday in August of 2016. There'll be a lot of activities between now and then, all through 2015 and into 2016 to do that. If you're interested, I encourage you to go to www.nps.gov/centennial, and there's quite a bit of information about what's going on in South Florida, what will be going on in other parts of the country, and all 401 park units of the National Park Service. That's a lot. So you might find something of interest there. As a way to move forward with this centennial celebration, the National Park Service has a plan that they put out and have involved the public greatly. It's basically 39 different actions, and they range widely from bringing more artists into the park, bringing postdocs into the park, and improving our ability to use technology, the ability to bring along the younger generation and have them become proponents and supporters of parks in the future. One of the things that brings me to the connection here tonight with the artist that has been done was 100th birthday is a time for celebration. It's also a time for reflection. And the National Park Service thought that one way to do this would be to revisit a fairly important document that was done in the 1960s called the Leopold Report, which laid out some very broad visions about how the national parks across the country should be managed. They brought together a blue ribbon panel, if you will, of some fairly high-powered scientists, a Nobel laureate, a couple of people on the National Academy of Science, and then even the conservation luminary Thomas Lovejoy was in on that panel. They reviewed the old document. They put out a new one, asking the question: what's changed? What has changed from the past that we need to know about, and how should we move forward in an uncertain future to manage parks for the next 100 years? It's a very thin document. It's 23 pages. That's remarkable for a federal document, right? I mean, how many federal documents are 23 pages? And they devoted 18 words, so these words are really valuable, right? They really spent a lot of time thinking about it, and they devoted 18 words to the idea of transformative experiences. And I'll read you exactly what they said. They want the parks to consider and manage such that distinctive and transformative experiences should be available to all Americans in all units of the national park system. Think about that. Distinctive, transformative, all Americans, all park units. 401 of them right now. There might be 402 before Thanksgiving. Might be one in South Chicago. But that's a lot. It's a big task. And so the question that I had that really fascinated me was, in the arts, with a great group like this great relationship we have with artists in the park, can the arts, in some way, can the arts facilitate, can the arts provide opportunities for transformative experiences, whatever that is? And we might talk about that later. And if they do, who does it provide it for? Does it provide it for the artist? Can it provide it for the consumer, the viewer of the art? Both, perhaps? So that's kind of the question, and maybe the thread that runs through a lot of what we'll hear about tonight, or maybe we can explore some of that too. But that's something to think about. It's, what is a transformative experience to you? Have you had one? Are you willing to admit it? But and does art have any role to play in that? And how does that play out in a wilderness setting like Everglades National Park?
Super. Thank you, Skip. I am a few slides behind on the slideshow, so I wanted to share this with you. Skip actually joined the board last February, and since then he's gone out and met each fellow for a coffee or a hike as soon as they check into the residency. And the picture that you're looking at right now is Skip, taken by Donna Levy in April, holding a python skin right up to his head. This was part of a series that was just shown at FAU in an exhibition called Common Ground. And here's Skip doing a live demo at our fundraiser last April. Skip is also a budding artist, and you'll be able to see some of his work at UM in an exhibition in March called Anthropocene. So I'll let him talk about these in a bit. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Anne McCrary Sullivan. She recently returned from a Fulbright year in Nigeria, where she pursued, in a new context, her ongoing interest in transformative teaching and learning. As the daughter of a marine biologist, a working poet, and a professor of interdisciplinary studies and education, she engages a particular interest in the conjunctions of science and art. She was an AIRIE writer in residence in 2003 and has since completed 2 books grounded in Everglades experience. She is currently working on 2 more Everglades books and recently completed a manuscript of poems from that year in Nigeria. Please give a warm welcome to my friend and our board member, Anne McCrary Sullivan.
Hi. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes here to give a preliminary brief response to Skip's question about transformative experience and whether artists in a residency might have a transformative experience. The answer for me is yes. There's no doubt about it. And transformation occurred on multiple levels, in multiple ways that I can only begin really to touch on. But I'll start by telling the story of how my residency played out. I had a sabbatical year, so for a year I was free to not focus entirely on academic work. I could be a poet. And I wanted an artist's residency that I could drive to, so I Googled artist in residence Florida, and lo and behold, what came up was an artist in residence program in the Everglades. At that point, I had never set foot in the Everglades. I really had no clue what the Everglades was. I'd heard of it. I had a vague sort of watery idea. But they had a residency, so I applied, and on January 3 of 2003, I showed up with all of my ignorance, ready to settle into a little cottage, I thought, and just quietly write poems and maybe take a sweet walk every once in a while. Well, by day 3, things had changed radically. By day 3, every morning I was packing a backpack with water and journal and camera and a tape recorder and references, and I was heading out to do field work. I followed rangers around with my tape recorder. I looked things up in my books. I journaled constantly based on direct observation. And then in the evening, I would type up all of my notes. I would transcribe the recordings. And in that process at night, what began to happen was that poems were emerging from what I was learning about the plants and animals and ecosystem. That's one of the pieces of science and how science became part of my transformative experience. The metaphors arose from the science. So I had to learn more science. I had to learn the behavior of birds. I had to learn the morphology of insects and of plants in order to discover the metaphors that were touching on interior things. There's another whole layer of transformation in that I came to the Everglades, and one of my poems begins this way. I came to the Everglades with a grief. The poem continues, "This is what I have learned. Weeping for beauty replaces weeping for grief." And the rest of the poem is about plants and animals. I thought for a long time the poems were really about plants and animals and ecology. That's what I thought I was writing. And I remember the day on the Anhinga Trail when I realized I wasn't writing about those things at all. I was writing about my grief, how I was working through that grief. I was learning from the natural world how to do that. Long story short, I have a whole new methodology, a whole new artistic methodology that I did not have before, that has been transformed. And in the single month that I was in that park, my grief was also transformed. You know, grief doesn't disappear instantly, but The progress I made in resolving that grief over 1 month's time was astounding, still is astounding to me as I look back upon it. Lots more I could say about art and science, but maybe some of that will come up and be relevant later. That's the short answer to your question, Skip.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne. I love that story. I haven't heard part of that. Thank you for sharing with us. Anne also recently volunteered to shepherd 10 or 12 students on a 3-day paddle in the Everglades for the Everglades Wilderness Writing Expedition, correct?
3 of them are here.
On Thursday night at FIU, there was a kind of not an award ceremony, but a ceremony where the students were reading all of the poems and things they wrote when they were with Anne out in the wilderness for 3 days. It was so touching and amazing to hear almost every single student tell Anne that she is now their role model, truly a mentor for so many people. So I applaud her for that. Really do. Next up, we would like to introduce you to Reed van Brunschot. Pardon me if I don't pronounce everything perfectly, Reed. She currently lives and works in Miami. She received a BFA from the Rietveld Academy for the Arts in Amsterdam, Netherlands in 2011. Working across varying mediums, Van Brunschot rematerializes quotidian objects, transforming them into site-specific tableaus, sculptures, and interventions, often in public space. Her interest in the universal human condition stems from a diverse background of living in Europe, South America, North America. Selected exhibitions include the Living Room Milk Gallery, Amsterdam in 2012, an independently organized public intervention at the Turbine Hall, Tate Modern, London in 2009. Van Brunschot recently was awarded a year-long Cannonball Artist Residency in Miami and just completed her AIRIE residency in the very wet, mosquito-laden month of September. Please welcome her.
I'm the freshest one. It's funny because I grew up in Miami, in the suburbs, in South Miami area, and I had gone to the Everglades, and I grew up with this knowledge that there was this kind of line of demarcation, Chrome Avenue, and there was suburbs, and then there was this vast wilderness where I can go check out alligator in Indian tribes and people opening mouths and sticking their head in, and that's all I knew. And then at the same time, I also grew up with these perfectly planted plants in the suburbs, and then roots of a tree that would upgrow out of the ground onto the sidewalk and take over. And so this kind of emergence of like nature and suburbia, and having that knowledge, and then traveling a bit of the rest of the world, and then coming back to Miami, I was really curious. What is really the Everglades, and like and you know, this opportunity came around to actually work there as an artist, and I thought this is great because then I can really, you know, explore it and get my hands and feet dirty and everything else. So I got to the Everglades, and I thought, instead of bringing in my own artwork and everything that I know, I want to just kind of come in and let it dictate what it needs to say. And I started off by having a conversation with Skip, and in that conversation we talked a lot about invasives, and invasives is a really prevalent theme happening, not just with plants but in the animals, and I'm sure you've all heard it, you know, but it is one of the main topics happening. But I you know, it's interesting being an artist because you look at it as a different perspective, kind of neutral perspective of going, well, you know, well, when did we decide, you know, this is the most pristine state, and this year kind of signifies what is the natural state and what we should kind of strive to keep. And And these are the list of plants that we need to have, and these are the list of animals that we need to have. So kind of in a way, like a kind of being like a child asking this question, like, what is truly an invasive, you know? And is nature not constantly in flux? And I know these are very basic, maybe naive questions, you know, but I thought they were questions nonetheless that are very important to ask. And as an artist, you can ask those questions. So my residency went on into delving a little bit deeper into what is an invasive, and I don't know if you have any more pictures in there. Right. So in this project, I thought it really funny, like going to like all the tourist centers and you know, meeting all the scientists and stuff, and asking that question, like, who is the invasive? What is the invasive? And I thought, I mean, essentially we are the invasives. You know, we're there in this pristine natural land and working in it, studying it, visiting it, educating ourselves in it. However, everybody's still wearing like the same, you know, gear of like either touristy, colorful clothes, or, you know, tivas, or, you know, just it feels like a uniform of what you wear when you go out into these kind of natural lands. So I thought to kind of integrate that idea of like what is a typical suburban outcast or invasive, and then plunge her into the Everglades. And so I took a series of photographs of being a Gothic tourist in the Everglades, and I also have some where I'm with other tourists. I did another project as well with, really it's a Godzilla, but it's reminiscent of all the elements of a dinosaur. I had this like 30-foot inflatable Godzilla that I wanted to blow up somewhere in the Everglades and make sure I dotted all the I's, T's, whatever. Got permission from everybody to make sure that it was okay where I can put it up and where I can't. And there's this land in the Everglades called the Hole in the Donut, which is a restoration area that used to be farmland and is now being stripped until we finally get back to its original native plants. But this was also the only flatland, dry location where I could blow up this inflatable that I had. And just kind of taking this idea of something that probably was previously there, or maybe not previously there, symbolic of what was previously there before, and this land that has been like taken over and taken back and taken over, and I don't know if I'm confusing y'all, but but yeah, my experience is still pretty fresh, so I still have to take it all in. But I think to answer Skip's question, because I also wanted to say something about that, was I think we as artists are indeed those kind of naive, or maybe not so naive, translators, where we kind of create these images and make them more digestible for other people to understand what this area means, and maybe even ask further questions of, you know, where are we going with these things, and not necessarily that one person has the solid answer of where we should go with things, but questioning that as well. So I think, yeah, we're just translators.
Thank you so much, Reed. I would like to take a moment to introduce you to Gustavo Matamoros now, who is an audio composer. Very unusual application for a residency in the Everglades. We were so excited to receive it. He's from Venezuela. He's an interdisciplinary artist, community organizer, and educator who has established his residency here now for many years. He attended the University of Miami in 1979 to 83. He has taught critical and creative listening at the Design and Architecture Senior High School and at Miami International University Art and Design. He has also offered periodical lectures about his work in sound. He's one of the founders of the South Florida Composers Alliance, a Miami-based organization. He's also the founder of the Subtropics Experimental Music and Sound Art Festival. Gustavo's work is featured at FAU at the moment and will be up through March, I believe, that audio installation. Is that correct? Gustavo and Skip were actually one of the original collaborators, right, Skip, before you joined the board? Skip spent a lot of time taking Gustavo out at night, I believe, to find various nocturnal sounds which aren't always audible to the human ear. So Gustavo is going to go ahead and take the mic and tell you a little bit about his work and play some of those sounds for you now. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Deborah. So let's see if we have a slide. Okay, that slide is not there. It's supposed to be of, of the installation that's up at the Florida Atlantic University. It's an installation called Bats and Insects. So one of the things that I did during my residency was try to get to acquaint myself with the Everglades through sound. And just like everybody else, Skip was a great deal of help there. One of the things that Skip specializes on is on the study of bats. And bats, they make sounds, but they make sounds that we can't hear because they're ultrasonic. These sounds, the calls that they make are intended for navigation mostly, and so they happen at frequencies that are beyond our hearing ability. So I wanted to see if I could record some bats, and Skip was kind enough to let me know where it was likely for me to be able to find the bats in the park. And since you can't hear them when you're recording, I was there setting up with the microphone exactly when Skip told me, between 6 and 9:30 in the evening in the Lone Pine Key. And I heard so many other sounds, but only when I got back to the cottage, when I could actually listen to or look at the computer screen and see the sonogram of the recordings, and see what you see in the background in this slide is actually represents somewhat of the frequency. There's a bunch of red in the center. That's, I would say, around 15,000 hertz. And above that, you see the bats, right? Those are around 40,000 hertz. Very difficult for us to hear that. Anyway, when you transpose those sounds to a hearing range, which is about 3-4 octaves down, you hear something like this. Wait. Actually, it's not playing that. Oh, too bad. Let's see. It should play when I do this. Well, so it's not playing. Instead, I'm going to play you some other sounds that actually I heard. This is exactly the place where I recorded the bats. And as I was recording the bats, I heard sounds such as the ones you're hearing now. Are you getting any sound now? Yes. Okay, good. So this is a place, I was told to call it by one of the rangers, the bridge to nowhere, which is basically, off of the main road. You can, about 14 miles down the road, there's this entrance to this deck. It's like a bridge. And you walk through it, and just a few feet down, it ends. And this recording was made about maybe midnight. So I'm going to give you just a few sounds that belong in different places in the park. Just to give you a sense of what I did, I realized that during the day it was difficult to find the kind of sounds that would be productive, and so I learned after a couple of weeks that I should go record at night. So some of these recordings were made as late as 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I spend the whole night, just going around. Here's, let's see. Oh, here's an owl. Takes a little while for it to. Because it requires more quiet, I'll skip to the next. Here's a propeller plane. It'll blend well with the sounds of the street here. Sorry, can you bring it down? I had it down over here. Okay. That's better. All right, I'll play a couple more sounds, and here's sounds from Lompine Key. Those are the sounds that accompany the bats. So these are sounds that are happening at the normal, regular hearing range. So this is what I was hearing, not knowing that I was also recording the bats. Then there's some more here. Mahogany hammock is another area where you can actually. A lot of these are amphibians. Here you can hear the mosquitoes. And the last one is a bunch of birds here in Paheoki, I think. Oh, okay, some more frogs. And the birds. Catbird. All right, so I'll stop it there.
Thank you so much. You may have noticed in the beginning of the program there was a video playing behind us. That is thanks to the next duo I would like to introduce you to. They were artists in residence in the month of July, which, believe me, takes a great deal of patience and courage to complete. And complete they did. And I think they've done some of the finest work I've seen to come out of the Everglades. We're so pleased that they could come back and hang out with us tonight, all the way from New Brunswick, Canada. So I'd like to tell you about Valérie Leblanc. She's an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and educator based in New Brunswick. She's presented, screened, and toured works throughout Canada, the US, Europe, and Australia. Her work spans poetry, video poetry, performance, visual, and written theory. She has presented The Renovation at the Ruins Conference in the Senate House in London, UK, in 2011. In 2012, she published her play, The Raft, through Basic Bruegel Editions. creating the Media Pack Board, the MPB, Portable Screening Performance Apparatus in 2005, LeBlanc has used the device as impetus for events involving art centers and public audiences and participators. She recently launched the MPB X EPUB, a critical discourse surrounding ideas of portability in art and art dissemination. Quite an amazing woman. Please give her a round of applause. Thank you. Valerie, if you would like to hold on 1 second, I'm going to introduce Daniel as well, and that way the two of you can speak as a team. Would that be great? Daniel Dugas is a poet, videographer, and musician who has participated in solo and group exhibitions as well as festivals and literary events in North America, Europe, Mexico, and Australia. One of his most recent videos, Insomni, was finalist at the 6th edition of La Parola Immaginata Festival in Treviglio, Italy. His 8th book of poetry, Des Ravins au bout des lèvres, excuse me if I butchered the title, was released in May through Édition Prise de Parole in Ontario, Canada. So in July, as I mentioned, this talented team worked in collaboration on the project Flow, Big Waters in the Everglades National Park. Recording and researching several aspects of this unique biosphere, the two are currently producing sound walks to be available to park visitors. What they're going to do is explain a little bit about their process now, and then we're going to relax. There's about a, I think, 8 to 10 minute video we can enjoy. After that, we're going to wrap up the program with a quick talk about transformative learning before we let you go. I know we started a little bit late tonight, so just try to give them your full attention because this duo has really traveled a very long way to be here with you tonight. Let's welcome them.
That's really sweet. Actually, when you take the plane, it doesn't seem like it's that far. It's just a bunch of hours in a cramped little space. So I'd like to just say a little something about Skip's question about the transformative. And one of the things is, it happened in Chiquita actually one day. Before we came to the Everglades, we researched the histories and the stories and geographical notes and anything that could give us an understanding of where we were going, you know, to give us an insight of before we arrived. And then, as is in always the case, it's always much different when you actually arrive than what you had ever imagined it would be, like when you're actually on site. And one day we took a walk out to the now abandoned Chiquita Day Use site, and something really changed for me there. It was kind of a magic that washed over me as I explored, you know, the overgrown paths and the deep grasses. In a sense, it gave me an aesthetic sense to go there that was like, I've had it happen before, but not very many times in my artistic career. Sometimes when I was teaching, I would get up in the morning and before I'd prepared to teach software for the day, and before leaving, I'd open up this big art book and think about things in the morning before I left, and I would just open the page at a blank and see what I'd get, and I'd always come with something that I wouldn't have chosen, and so, but it always like made a big impression for me on the day. The way I felt about that particular artwork was very intense because it was like first thing in the morning. And that's what happened at Chiquita. Like when I went walking there, it suddenly felt really different kind of place. And I felt it really needed to get cleaned out somehow. It really needed to clear out that there were a lot of things that happened in Chiquita that were really a mystery. And later talking to Skip and to Tom Rahel of the Swamp Apes, found out that actually a lot went on in Chiquita that has to be changed. A lot of cleaning up, I guess, in that particular space. So I just wanted to say something about the transformative, and like that's how I got affected there in Everglades and took that away as a really, it was very transformative for me, and I hope that eventually my work will show that. We'll see.
I'll do the same thing. Talked about a bit about the feedback about the transformative experience, but also the science and art relation. And there's a book, it's called a code book, written by Simon Singh in the year 2000. And in it, he talks about the encryption, the history of encryption. And there's in the section about the encryption as we know it now, like, you know, when you send a message encrypted over the internet, it's encrypted with a private key, and there's a public key that allows people to decrypt what you've sent, and it seems like common practice now. But when it was discovered, the trick how to do it in the mid-70s, it was a fairly big event. And it's known as the Hellman, Diffie, and Meckel key. And in the book, there's this little paragraph, and I'll just read it because I come back very often as a similarity between artists and scientists. Ralph, like us, was willing to be a fool, one of the guys. And the way to get to the top of the heap in terms of developing original research is to be a fool, because only fools keep trying. You have idea number one, you get excited and it flops. Then you have idea number two, you get excited and it flops. Then you have idea number 99, you get excited and it flops. Only a fool will be excited by the 100th idea, but it might be the 100 ideas before one really pays off. Unless you're foolish enough to be continually excited, you won't have the motivation, and you won't have the energy to carry it through. And I really think that I see myself as an artist as exactly the same way, and I think that our scientists that are discovering things, you have to be a fool, because we are, I think, artists and writers who are continuously excited about what we do. And to be in the Everglades was really an occasion to be overexcited. And I was so excited that for the first time in my life, I actually put a sticker on my laptop. And it's the Everglades National Park sticker. And that's how much I was transformed. You know what, like the project we're doing, it's videos, it's video poetry work, but it's also sound walk. And we've completed a few videos, video poetry in collaboration, and we're working on the sound walks probably in January, February. But you know, we've been there like Reed and like Gustavo and like everybody else, like a full month. And but we've been there like since July, August, September, October. Now I've been there 5 months almost. And you know, I'll be there for December, and I will be there January and February. And I think that in 8 months, I will have actually changed a lot. And that's the power of art as well.
Awesome. Daniel, why don't you set up the video that everyone's about to see right now? Would you like to tell them something about it?
About which one?
The video that's coming right now. Can you introduce it?
Yeah. But the first one, it's exotic versus exotic. And it's, I guess, man versus nature, the eternal combat. And it was before that, but it's a footage from the Florida Memory website, which is a great source of a great resource website. There's tons of stuff, and it's all everybody can use it. You have just to acknowledge the organization, but we've used the top portion is at I can't remember, the aquarium. I just think I've got it here. The Florida. No, I don't have the name, but anyway, it's on their website, and it's a man and his son wrangling anaconda, which looks like a python.
And so essentially you went into those archives and spliced the old footage with your footage, correct?
And over footage of when we went with the hydrologist of the park, Steve McQueen-Tedis, in the Shark River, which was an amazing experience.
I might add, these videos have not been seen in public before, so we're so happy to have them tonight.
So there's actually 8 videos and they're all short, so it's a 12-minute program.
And ideally, what will happen is people can see or download these from your site, Daniel. Ideally, in the future, people will be able to access these from your website, correct?
Yeah, they will, yeah.
Standing by, I got 2 more coming.
Roger, standing by for 1-8. David and Manatee.
Yonder sesame creature, lily white brows, white as snow. I will court her for her beauty, make her answer me yes or no. La 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 la. Madam, I will court you for your beauty if you only entertain. Sir, sit down and I'll treat you handsome if you never come again. La 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 la. I have gold and silver, madam, I have house and land, madam, I have a heart of pleasure, you may have the your command. La 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 la. What cares I for your gold and silver? What cares I for your house and land? Nothing cares I for the world of pleasure. All I want is a handsome man. La 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 la. Madam, what makes you brag on beauty? Beauty is a flower that will decay. Full of red rose in the morning, by the noon it will fade away. La 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 la. The ripest apple is soonest rotten, the warmest love soonest cold. Young man seek his so uncertain, pray, young miss, don't you be so bold. La 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 la.
Amazing, amazing work. Thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. Thank you. We'll have a moment for questions in just a second. We did want to touch a little bit more on the transformative experience that we have all been talking about this evening. So we threw together this slide for you. Skip, did you want to add something else at this juncture? Just kind of describing how we feel in AIRIE residency, or some kind of experience in the wilderness in general for people might lead to transformative experiences?
Well, there's quite a bit, I guess, that could be said. It's a big topic, as Anne likes to point out, so I don't know if it's really the best time or venue, but I did want to sort of summarize in a definition when we think about transformative experiences and whether or not they're brought about by science or the intersection of science and art or some other avenue. There's a fellow by the name of Jack Mesereau. He's kind of the father of the study, the scholarly study of transformative learning and transformative experiences. And I liked his summary definition, and I've heard a little bit of that in what many of you have said. He said that what we're looking at when we have these things we describe as transformational, and I think sometimes we use that, and maybe even the authors of that report I mentioned use it, and they're not even sure what it is. They know it when they have it, right? You know it when you see it, right? It's like the judge, I can't remember his name, that talked about pornography. Can't describe it, but I know it when I see it, right? So, or obscenity. But the notion is that Jack did a lot of study, tried to put this together, tried to outline the steps that it took to have a transformative experience. And I like his summary definition, which was some kind of a structural change in the way we see ourselves and our relationships with not only ourselves, but with others and the world around us. And the central idea, he thought, was then that some kind of cognitive dissonance, right? So there's some kind of disturbance. Sometimes it's described as a disorienting dilemma, right? That some kind of cognitive dissonance, some kind of realization that what one believes isn't necessarily making sense anymore, right? You went in, something disrupted, you came out because some belief was changed, and you incorporated that, and that becomes really what's at the heart of a transformative experience. You go, you test, you're challenged, these views that you had, these assumptions that you had, and you then change, you adopt some new perspective, and you move on, and you wait for the next one or whatever. But I think for me, when I think about the artists and working in the wilderness and its ability to provide transformative experiences, it's pretty easy. I don't mean to take the easy way out, but I like if I can find it. I like the off-sided example of taking kids into the woods, right? And Anne just got back from this great experience with wilderness neophytes out there and having them exposed to things that they had never seen before. And it's often described as taking the urban child out into the wilderness, and one can imagine that being disoriented. I've had this. I was a wilderness guide in a previous life before I worked for the National Park Service, and then I worked part-time as a wilderness guide while I did work for the National Park Service. And we often had children, and we took youth groups. And what one saw was, I think, and this is my description again, because I'm not a scholar in this area, but this idea that these folks we took out there, as well as their parents, many times it's the first time in the woods, if you will, that they were disoriented by a lack of the familiar. That was kind of the dissonance that occurred. Things did not look as familiar as they did from the places they came. And with a child thinking about that, there's this conflict or this dissonance between silence and noise, this idea of trees versus buildings, dark versus light, endless stars versus no stars. And I've heard that a lot, and I've seen that a lot with kids we worked at, and it just shakes them in many ways to the core that there are no lights. And I've heard even from some of the artists that have come that have stayed, and they would say after that first or second night, it's really dark out here. You know, and they're not from far away. They're coming from Miami, and they maybe have even visited before. But they go there and they stay in the resident apartment, and they say it's really dark. Mm-hmm. And if what little power we have or what little lights we have happens to go off while you're there, it's really dark. And that's, you know, and that was conveyed. And I think some of that challenge and some of that dissonance is what is really important. And is used by, whether it's kids or by adults, whether it's by artists or scientists in some ways, to have these transformative experiences where things no longer seem right, and you have to adopt a different perspective to make it seem correct. This idea of, and you brought it up with grief, a lot of times the scholars that write about transformative experiences talk about this idea of disorienting dilemma. And a lot of that comes from, transformative experiences come about from hardships. It can be mental hardships, it can be physical, there can be the result of diseases and health issues, disabilities. That's often used in the literature. I often find that in the literature as being the resulting in transformative experiences. And art often comes into it in terms of people that have had some of these disorienting dilemmas, and the art brings them around to that new perspective. Or they are an artist, and some disorienting dilemma like a disability affects their ability to do that, and they are transformed in some other direction within their art, like someone who has full color color sight and loses that, and now can only see in black and white. Just recently read about an artist that moved in that direction and had to come to grips with that, and in his terms was transformative. So I don't know what much more to say about that. I do like the notion, the intersection of science and art, especially when the science brings, and I think this can be transformative because it brings tools and techniques and topics that we don't normally, we aren't normally exposed to, and brings things to us that are normally unseen, whether it's the use of a microscope to look at things that are small that we don't normally see, or it's use of a telescope to look at things that are very far away that we can't see, or the use of microphones, in Gustavo's case, to bring to our ears things that we can't normally hear. I like this idea of the unseen becoming seeable. So I don't know if that helps.
It does so much, and we're in that tricky part of the evening where, because we started a little bit late, there is some programming scheduled for after us this evening. So I do have a couple of brief announcements before you all run out the door, but first, are there any questions for the panelists from the audience? Anybody? Yes?
So we're the three that went with Anne. We were lucky enough to have her.
Welcome, welcome. In case the audience didn't hear, the question was really about how one re-enters society, adjusting back to the norm. Who wants to take that? Sure.
I really missed it. But as Daniel mentioned, like, we've been working with our footage and our sound since we left, and our photographs, our video, and for all these months. But in those first few days when we got back, and you get back home and you realize you got to take care of this and that, and you're in a lot of directions that you don't want to be in. We had kind of I think Gustavus was talking about it one time, with kind of a withdrawal. You go through this withdrawal period from having been there and then having to leave it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, particularly interesting because of the, just making recordings, right? And in the total dark and all that. That was precisely what happened. And then over a period of a couple weeks, you start kind of absorbing that environment and getting back. For me, the getting back was about then what do I do with these recordings, and and I'm listening to the recordings, and the recordings are good, but they're not like being there, So incidentally, the slide that's up right now has just a brief excerpt of sound that is a piece that's constructed with some of these sounds. And the idea here is to make music not so much that features the sounds themselves, but that somehow behaves the way the things behave in the Everglades. So I'll play a little bit of it. Trying to create some kind of immersive. So anyway, it goes something like that. And I don't know if I hear if I hear this. The sound is stereo in this recording. I don't know if you hear it. If you hear that. Here. Okay. So this happened at the Botanical Garden in Miami Beach, and so you have a similar kind of a smaller version of the Everglades in there, and anyway, so.
Amazing. Thank you. If there are no other questions, I have a couple of quick things to let you know about. Anybody? Are we good? All right. In 2015, AIRIE boasts a creative group of local, national, and international artists, painters, new media artists, photographers, writers, a filmmaker, and an architect. The 2015 AIRIE Fellows are writer Andrew Gottlieb, architect Caterina Tiazzoldi, painter Elizabeth Condon, photographers Alan Winslow and Matthew Booth, audio artist Valerie George, filmmaker Celia Ralston Hall, as well as Florida natives including the multidisciplinary artists Frankie Cruz, Christina Peterson, and Onajit Shabaka. We have two people here with us this evening if you would like to stand up in the audience. Nancy Krim is a writer who joins us in March. Welcome, Nancy. And is Jason Hedges here? Yes, stand up, Jason. Thank you. Congratulations. So we hope we've inspired you to get out and explore our wild peninsula, meet the artists, and think about how our short and long-term actions will affect the future generations. Please come out and meet us at AIRIE in the Garden in January on the 24th for our annual benefit. We have several installations planned in the garden. Oh, that's Jason Hedges' piece up there I put there for you today. He does amazing prints. We're so pleased to have him on our team. And there are also cards circulating the room which have our schedule on it for the incoming season. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Thanks to the Knight Foundation. Thanks to the team who organized this beautiful tent. Nicole and Lizette, everybody. Round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. George.